In this discussion, we're going to look at changes in the publication process. I always like to start this discussion with this quote from William Gibson, who is a science fiction writer who is most famous for coining the term cyberspace. And he said once, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." And that really applies to publication. So, some of you have already dealt with many of these changes, others probably have never thought about it or been affected by it. So, we're dealing with a process that's continually evolving since its origin. So some of these issues are not new, but some are going to have fairly dramatic changes in the way the process works. So there have been changes throughout the publication process. In particular, we're interested in changes in peer review, and later we'll touch on it, but go in more detail later. There's been changes in conferences that you have to be aware of. And so everything about publication is going through some aspect of change. And again, how it affects you as authors, it may affect you in some ways and not affect you in other ways. It may affect you now, and or it may affect you in later times. Okay, so let's first want to look at how these changes affect the concerns of the editor and the editor's role in the publication process. So the first thing is, what goals do the editor have? What the editor needs to consider in the process. So the first thing, of course, is still determining what is appropriate or not for that particular journal. And then some editors have the ability to choose the journal they think it's most appropriate for. And so in some cases, your paper might be automatically sent, and normally you would have some approval over this, to another journal that the editor thinks is more appropriate. And the editor still has the choice in reviewers and deciding who to review, although as we'll discuss later, the review process itself may have often changed a great deal. Some of the biggest changes have been in the peer review process, and particularly those of you who can deal with preprint servers. And this is one example where some of you have already been using preprint servers like arXiv, and some probably have not heard of them. But it changes. First of all, the preprint servers are part of a long tradition that goes back to the initial creation of journals of how to make publication faster. So now with a preprint server, you can publish your paper and before the journal has even accepted it. And other journals are using their own to go through the regular publication process, but they may be able to post papers online before the actual journal comes out. So all of those issues refer back to how fast an article can come out. So what effect does this have on publication? Well, again, it's very dramatic in terms of the effect on peer reviewers. First of all, preprint servers, if they work, it gives you the opportunity to get some kind of feedback and review before you submit the paper. Obviously, in many cases, that could be very important. And it could also affect peer reviewing, because the idea of double-blind peer reviewing, once the paper is put on a preprint server, you can't do double-blind peer reviewing. So it will change the nature of peer reviewing. And there are many people who think that the double-blind system, which allows people to be anonymous, is not the best way of doing it, because people can say what they want without any fear of repercussion. And again, in some fields, there are already areas where reviewing is not anonymous. For example, in book reviews. I was once confronted at a conference by an author who didn't particularly like some of the things I'd said in a review. And the question is, that's made me actually very cautious in terms of reviewing. So there is still an argument for the traditional way of doing peer review, but those ways are under pressure and they're very contested now. So one of the biggest changes, I think, in the publication process that affects to varying degrees every author is the growth of open access. What does open access do? Well, it increases the possibility of citation. So more people read your article, more people can cite it. It increases access to articles. So more people can read them. And people who may or may not be able to afford the high cost of journals will have access to the articles. As I've said a number of times, Ohio State, we're privileged here that we get access to most articles, but people in different countries, and this may affect you a great deal when you go home. I don't know. There's not very much research on that. So the idea of making your articles open has a great deal of appeal. The cost of publication come down. Obviously, you can eliminate some of the high cost of getting an article into print, and you can simply publish it with a PDF file or some equivalent that has a very low cost. So that means more journals can appear, and the journals aren't under such pressure to charge really high prices. There are issues on how knowledge is verified. As I mentioned, in peer review, there are new ways of verifying information. And so traditional processes may not be able to stay in place. And so the verification process has shifted a lot towards more to the readers and to the authors themselves and away from the journals. And that itself is a kind of interesting question. And a lot of you have greater access to data. That's been an issue, particularly in North America, where there's been rulings that make data open. And also in Europe, there's new initiatives to try to open up data. So a lot of times when you're able to write a paper based on other people's data that they've published somewhere in repositories, then that's a consequence of open access. There are certain limitations to it as well. There's the problem of credibility. Our open access journals have the kind of credibility. Many of them are new and they don't have impact factors. And a lot of professors don't want to publish their work in open access because they don't know if they get the benefits. Since I'm older and retired, I can publish where I want. And I had published an article last year in an open access journal, and then a few months later, I got a email from the editor that the journal was shutting down because it couldn't attract the highest quality of articles because people were hesitant about submitting it in open access. So that is a dilemma that open access journals face. We'll go into more detail about predatory journals. Some have linked open access to the rise of predatory journals, which again puts more pressure on you as authors to decide the quality of the journal. Open access has also been sort of taken over by some large publishers who charge large fees. Obviously, some people can pay them. Often you can build them into grants, but other authors cannot pay them, and so they're not going to be able to publish their work in open access. Many of the large publishers offer all authors the ability, but pay $2,000-3,000 unless you're working on a grant is almost prohibitive. And so the question of the verification of knowledge, as I said, it's become more, some journals want to continue the traditional way of verifying knowledge through peer reviewing. Other journals want to, open it up so that readers have the ability to choose what articles they wish to read, and therefore what articles are valid or not. So this has also been an area of conflict. So we want to look now at what is open access. And David Wiley has given 5 principles that define what is meant by open access. One is the ability to retain your own information, copy it, and use it as you want. The second is to be able to revise other people's information and modify a copy and then transfer it. For example, if you want to translate it, right now translation of other people's material is in violation of copyright law. Remix is the ability to take your material and take someone else's material, combine it together, and create a new kind of material. What we call it when discussing copyright law as being transformative. Fourth is to be able to reuse material. That is to take your material and be able to do what you want with it, and take other people's material and be able to use it for your own purposes. And 5 is to redistribute your material of the original, revised, or remixed work and with other people. So in the old days, under strict copyright law, you weren't allowed to do that, but with open access and the way open access materials are often copyrighted, you can use it in the way you want.